How's it going?
Good, good. Sorry for the delay.
Oh,
I'm
no
feeling
problem.
better. Still sick, but I'm feeling a lot better now.
Well, that's good. You sound pretty normal.
Good, good. That means I normally sound like shit then, because I feel like shit still.
No, not
I
quite.
see
No,
that your
no.
subtle jab at me, your subtle Canadian humor.
Yes, very, very,
You
very
have
subtle.
plausible deniability to say you're not taking a jab at me, but I know where you're going with that.
Uh-huh. Yes, okay. Well, glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, yeah. So any thoughts on the name of the show?
Oh man. Not really, just that I guess I had thought we might have decided on film schooled,
You want to go with
but
that? Let me see the
well,
last list of names I sent you. You're
yeah.
sounding a little bit low. I hope you sound good on the recording, but you're sounding a little bit low in my headphones.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Maybe you'll sound normal when I hear the recording, but just as an FYI.
Okay, I'm not sure if I can turn this up somehow.
Maybe it'll be fine. But yeah, let me just see if I find the list the last time we went through this, just to see what the top candidates were. Okay, so this was the last list I sent you. Lessons in Cinema, Crash Course Cinema, Film Formula 101, Must See Movies, Screened, The Cinephiles, A Closer Look, or Film Schooled. And your choice was Film Schooled, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, Screamed is pretty good too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, we wanted to keep it fairly short, right?
Yeah, I like Screened. I
Yeah,
like Film School too. I like Crash Course Cinema in that it's an alliteration. You have the CCC.
yes, yes, and that does make sense. Crash Course Cinema.
Yeah.
Uh, have you
And we can
tried
call it
Google?
CCC too. For those who follow the show, they'll know the abbreviation, or Triple C.
Yes.
Um, Film Formula 101, must see movies. That's kind of appropriate because we are saying these are must see movies.
Yeah, my only problem with that is I have a friend who created a website called Must See Movies, and he used
You're
to
always
tweet.
worried about stuff like that.
Yes, well, since he's a friend of mine, I'm particularly worried. But
Mm.
yeah, yeah, if they're strangers, I suppose it's not that big a deal.
I like
Um,
cinephiles.
Cinephiles, yeah,
So, I mean, Film School is good. And I like Crash Course Cinema because of the
yeah,
alliteration.
yeah,
I like Screened because it's short. I mean, it gets to the point because we're screening these
yes,
movies in a way. And
yes.
I like Cinephiles. I like a lot of these. Do you feel, see, do you feel strongly about one?
Um, no, not really. They're all pretty good.
Mhm.
Have you tried Googling them like again, just see if there are
No, because
other?
I don't care. I don't care what comes up.
Okay. Um, yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I don't know. That's a tough one.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, in a way, Crash Course Cinema does describe what we're doing
Yeah.
fairly well.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, film schooled could imply that we've been trained in film school,
The
which
only
isn't
thing I
necessarily.
do, I like Film Schooled a lot because that was the
Yeah.
first one we came up with. The only detraction I don't like that about Film Schooled is people view school as a negative thing. It's like, oh, school, it's like I don't want that negativity to come with the
Yes.
show. Um,
Yeah.
so if we went with Film School, no rules, Film School is good, but it's a little too long.
Yes. Yes.
Um, there is a negativity that comes with school though. It's like, oh, I gotta learn something. No thanks.
Yes. I know what you mean. Yeah. Um, yeah. I don't know. This is like I said. I always had problems naming things,
I mean, the name
like,
doesn't have to be anything major. I just want something to
no,
put on there so it's easier to label in the videos.
for sure, yeah.
Um,
Um,
so I'm leaning towards Crash Course Cinema, Screened, and Cinephiles. And
okay.
then Must See Movies is good too, but you said your friend has something with that, right?
He does, yeah. I would hate to I would hate to piss him off, yes.
So between those three, are you feeling strongly about one of them?
Well, I think Crash Course Cinema and Screened probably edge out the other one a little bit for me. Um, and then it just depends. I think Crash Course Cinema has the meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Screened has the really, short snappiness to it.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a tough call.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't know. I mean, maybe Crash Course Cinema. I don't know. What do you think?
I like them both
Yeah.
for the same reasons. I mean, Screen gets to the point. It's short. It's simple. It's easy to like remember.
Yes. Yeah.
Crash Course Cinema, it's clever because you have the triple C thing, the alliteration thing, and
Yeah.
it's more descriptive than Screened, but Screen also does make the point.
Yes.
Crash Course Cinema is more descriptive, but it has 3 words instead of one to be more descriptive with.
True.
Um, it's tough. I like them both. I like them
Yeah.
both equally for different reasons.
Yeah. Maybe we can use them both. If we're Crash Course Cinema and Screened as like a sub. We have screened this. We could maybe
Screen
use
this, say.
it. Crash Course Cinema Screened. I don't know.
See, with Screened, we could also include the name of the title of the movie too. With Crash Course Cinema, it's just Crash Course Cinema. We could do
True.
Screened and then colon, whatever the movie is that we're doing,
Yes.
Descent, Screened, Descent.
Yes. Yeah.
You do something like that. Crash Course Cinema, it has to be Crash Course Cinema. To then include
True.
the title would be a little long then.
Yes, that's true.
We could do triple C, triple C, triple C,
Yeah.
The Descent or something like that. But Screen does have the benefit of being short.
It does. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe shorter's better.
Mm-hmm. So Screened?
Maybe Screened. Yeah.
The problem is somebody's going to hear the beginning of this podcast and be like, "Oh shit, they didn't go with Crash Course Cinema? Let me take that right now."
Yes, that's right.
See, we're giving away the secrets here, man. We're giving away all these great titles. They're going to be like, these idiots didn't go with Crash Course Cinema. Dude, I got the perfect name for our podcast, Crash Course Cinema.
Yes. Well,
see, Crash Course Cinema does imply some thought, because you're putting together something. There's like something there,
Yes.
Screened is just a word. Crash Course Cinema is like, you can't just think of Crash Course Cinema. You got to put thought into it. It has to be descriptive of something you're doing. Screened is just a word that anyone can use for anything movie related. Right. Crash Course Cinema is like, that's something,
Yeah.
Like, we don't have to brainstorm to come up with Screened. Crash Course Cinema, you got to brainstorm. Like, how do you come up with a good title? How do you describe our show?
Yeah, that's true.
But I do like the one word, and you can always include the name of the movie.
Yeah.
No matter how long the movie is, you're just adding one word in front of it, and that's the podcast. It's like Screened, The Godfather, Screened, The Shining.
Yeah. Yeah. I do like that aspect of it, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. I don't know. This is going to take some more thought, but at least we narrowed it down to two.
Yes. Okay.
So let's come back to this another time. But
Sure.
we're good with those two being the choices, right?
I think so. Yeah. I
Okay.
like them. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Moving on to The Descent.
Yes.
So this is kind of interesting for me because after watching this, I don't think I like the movie. By all means, I do like the movie. But considering the direction we're going with the show, after watching it, I don't think it's of the quality of movie that warrants the direction we're taking the show in. Like when I try to analyze it, the more I find like this movie isn't of the level that needs the type of dissection that we normally go through. Your thoughts?
Well, I've always kind of had the kind of opposite feeling that any movie is worth dissection, and sometimes a movie like The Descent, it's hugely popular. It was a big hit, and it really spoke to the audience. It spoke to people, and so for that reason alone, it's kind of worth taking a look at it and saying, okay, what is this all about? So I think it's fair enough to sort of dig in and try and understand a movie like The Descent.
No, I agree from the standpoint of like when we get to your section, we're breaking down the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it makes sense. But when we're talking about my section, when we're talking about like, exploring it and breaking down from that standpoint, there's not a lot there. There's not like a lot of deeper meanings or like philosophical things to really get into, which is kind of what I get into in my section. I didn't really find much to dissect. There's a lot I can talk about when we're just breaking down the movie itself, like with the plot and the story and stuff like that. But as far as like philosophically or like, things like that, I didn't find a lot there.
Hmm. Well, I guess that's fair enough. I think there are some interesting things that we could talk about, but yeah, I mean, maybe it isn't as deep as some of the others. You know, 3.5 hour epic stuff that we've been looking at. But yeah, I think it's still worth talking about it.
Yeah. All right, so let me figure out a few topics because I'm going to need to fill out my section of this podcast somehow. Okay. So as far as the music goes, I wasn't a big fan of the music. I actually felt it kind of detracted from the movie rather than add. I'm not someone that generally like breaks down things beyond cinematography and acting and direction. I don't go beyond that to like set design and sound design and scores. I don't really get into that stuff as much because I feel like that stuff shouldn't be too prominent. It should kind of just blend in the background. Unless you're talking about stuff like, Saturday Night Fever or like which has like a great soundtrack or like Indiana Jones or Star Wars that have great scores. And with those movies, you can't imagine those movies without either those songs or those scores. Uh, Aside from movies like that, I don't really pay too much attention, but I did find myself a little bit distracted by the music in this movie. It kind of made some of the scenes feel a little melodramatic that didn't really warrant it. At first, I felt the scenes weren't really working as a whole, but then as I really started thinking about it, I'm like, these scenes are fine. It's just that the music is it's kind of pulls me out of it a little bit. Feels a little like a Hallmark movie rather than like a serious, Hollywood release or like a um, real dark horror film, which it is.
It's interesting. I don't think I even noticed the music. I'm trying to think back now, and I can't quite picture it. I can't remember what the music was like. So you're talking about this sort of general soundtrack music, not like
I'm talking
songs
about
that,
like a lot of the music that happened in the first act.
right?
I just felt like it was like with the hospital scene.
Hmm.
It's just like, yeah, she just lost her family, but this music is making me want to laugh. When
Ah,
it's just like
okay.
it's so like over the top, And then when they're driving out to the cave, it's like so like, oh, it's so ominous. It's like, no, let's just have regular music, just some music they're playing in the car. You know, like most of these road movies type do. It's like you're just hearing whenever they're playing in the car. They're just like these young girls. Excuse me. There's these young girls who'd probably be listening to like Taylor Swift or something like that, or whatever was out in 2005. They'd be listening to pop music, and you know they'd be just like singing along or just like talking on their phones or talking about boys, their boyfriends or their husbands or whatever. It seems like they'd be doing more things like that. Instead we have like this ominous music playing, like, oh, it's going to be really dramatic. It's like, no, let's just build up to that moment when the drama comes and have the dramatic music.
Well, that's interesting. I know they did have the radio on in the car, and they complained about the sort of local music they were getting, sort of I don't know, rednecky or country kind of music that they didn't really care for, or religious music maybe. Um, but yeah, I think I remember now. There was some ominous soundtrack music that occurred after they turned off the radio. Um, yeah, so that's an interesting point. It didn't really bother me. I didn't really notice it, but I hear what you're saying, though.
Hmm. Yeah. Again, the overall movie was great. You know, once the action started, it was really great. But those are a few things kind of like I didn't really like in the setup. Another thing, I thought there were too many characters.
Mm.
And I think we discussed this once with another review, with a similar type setup, like a Deliverance type setup, where these characters go off and they all look a little too similar. And especially, I mean, this is my second time watching the movie, so it's easier for me to distinguish the characters. But to have like three blondes and like six main characters that you're following is just a little bit much. And it's not like these characters were really like so developed that you can like tell all of them apart. Honestly, the movie was just about two characters. It was about Juno and it was about Sarah. The others were kind of superfluous.
Yeah, that's interesting because I had the same thought, oddly enough. And I remember you're talking about the very first movie that we ever reviewed together, which was Rituals, the Canadian movie about a group of doctors who go on vacations together once a year. And interestingly enough, it's the same story here. It's a group of women who go on vacation once a year. And I did think of that because, first of all, I agree with you. I find Joe Bob Briggs once made this comment about a movie that had about 15 characters, and he said, five. There's supposed to be five characters. And that's kind of true. Like, there's usually five characters who go to the woods together, two couples and one person who's kind of the odd one out. And here we've got six. So we've got an extra character. And yes, I feel like I think the movie does a pretty good job of developing those two characters, Sarah and Juno. And I would also say there's a couple of others that I kind of got to know, but the other two are kind of a little cryptic to me. They kind of get lost in the crowd. So yes, I felt there were maybe one or two too many characters here to really fully get to know them, or maybe they just needed to actually spend a little more time with them. I don't know, but I did have that same thought, and especially once they're in the dark cave and they're all wearing these climbing outfits, it's kind of hard to tell them apart at times. And I was confused in some scenes, like, oh, is that Juno? No, wait a minute, it's someone else. So yeah, I agree with you on there.
Yeah, I can see his point with five characters being good when you have two couples and the odd person out. But I think five is too much when you're talking about all one gender.
Mm.
Just like Rituals, in the sense that if you have couples, then it's easier to distinguish because you're talking about multiple genders and you're talking about couples where it's like, all right, these two are together. Like, it's easier for me to break up these five people based on like their coupling up, and you know the relationships are, there's more dynamic with the relationships. We're talking about all friends, all the same gender, three of them are blondes. It's just a bit much. I think four would have been a good number. And honestly, I don't think a lot would be lost if there were only two characters, because then you could have really developed that relationship with those two.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like in the beginning, there's only three of them. When we see them sort of the year before, there's only three of them on the trip together, and so I was a little surprised when there were suddenly six. Um, so yeah, I think probably if I'm not sure, just two would have been as good, but if there were three or four, maybe. I think there were two extras that we didn't quite need. Um, but then again, I understand when you're making this type of movie, you want to kill people, so you got to have a couple extra people there so they can get bumped off.
Yeah, you want that body count.
Yeah.
But some of these characters, like I was able to distinct. So once I saw the six characters, I'm like, oh boy. So because I'm watching this to examine it, I was trying to think. I was looking for things that would make me remember this character, and some of the things that made these characters stand out. Like I was saying, all right, so he has six characters, and watched some of the behind the scenes stuff, and he really emphasized like how he wanted to make them three-dimensional. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, what makes this character memorable? How can I like remember this character the next time I see them? And the only thing I can remember is like Beth, I mean, Rebecca, she cut her hand.
Mhm.
That's the only, I'm like, all right, that's the one that cut her hand. That's the only thing I remembered about her character. I remember nothing else about her character. I remember
Yeah.
Holly. Holly was the one who had like the punk rocker hair.
Mhm.
Um, and then Sam was the one who had the watch that her boyfriend gave her. And it
Yeah.
was like the Chekhov's gun, where it's like the watch went off at the wrong time. I wish it would have directly led to her death because then it would have made it more memorable. But I mean, that's it. And and Beth, I don't remember anything about Beth. I know she was the one that was the catalyst for Sarah finding out Juno was like not really her friend.
Yeah.
But honestly, like there wasn't much there. And I was looking for like, all right, what would make these characters stand out? There wasn't really a lot there at all.
Yeah. Well, I think Beth is kind of, those are the three who were on the trip together the year before. It was Juno, Sarah, and Beth. And Beth sort of comes across as the more real friend, the one who's really supportive, and she's the one who drives with Sarah to the cabin. So they're kind of like, those two are real friends, and Juno kind of may not be as good a friend as maybe Sarah thinks. Or so to me, that's the dynamic. You've got the good friend and the bad friend. Um, but I do think Holly, is that her name? The young one. Uh, she stands out to me because she's kind of the one who's really kind of, she comes across as a bit dangerous. She's a bit of a risk taker. She's careless, and she's complaining that it's not going to be challenging enough. So she's kind of like the young hotshot who maybe takes too many chances and kind of gets herself in trouble. So she kind of stands out to me as a character. Um, Rebecca, I agree with you 100%. I don't know anything about Rebecca. I can't tell you other than the hand cutting. That's about it. And Sam, I think, is the one who is becoming a doctor. So she is able to do the medical stuff when they need medical attention. So she has a little bit going on, but the two of them, those are the two who I feel I don't really know very well. And they're kind of in the background a lot of the time. So, in a way, I understand why they're there, but they're not really, they're not as three dimensional, I guess, as the other characters to me.
Like you said though, not to be too negative on the movie, they're there for the body count. And I will
Yes,
say they all die in pretty epic ways.
that's true. That's very true. And I do appreciate the fact, my understanding is that in the original version of the movie, he was going to cast men and women, and it was going to be the more typical kind of thing. But I kind of like the fact that he went with all women, even though that does make it a little harder to tell them apart. But it's, I mean, for one thing, it's different, but I think it's, yeah, it kind of, it does make it more interesting somehow that they're all women, and it takes that dynamic out of play, that sort of, these two are a couple, these two are a couple. I don't know, there was something I really appreciated about the fact that they were all women.
Yeah, I guess it would have been interesting because then the whole relationship thing would have played out on screen instead of there
Yes.
just being like a 1 or 2 minute setup of a look here or a look there. We would have seen the husband there for the whole time, and that
Yeah.
whole dynamic would have played out throughout the course of the movie. So I think that
Yeah.
would have been interesting too. But I mean, I don't mind the setup as it is with all the women, just a little too many.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I did like the movie overall. These are just a few
Yes.
things that I thought could have tightened it up a little bit. But
Yes.
yeah, overall good movie, and I definitely recommend. Aside from a few of those nitpicks.
Yeah. I liked it a lot, actually. And I had first seen Neil Marshall's film Dog Soldiers, which I quite liked. And that movie has more of a sense of humor, as well as being kind of scary and full of action. And apparently, he didn't really want to be kind of pigeonholed as a horror director, so he wasn't sure that he wanted to do another horror film. But he went ahead and did The Descent, and I see a lot of similarities actually. But the funny thing is, I know people who love Dog Soldiers who hated The Descent, and I know other people who hated Dog Soldiers and loved The Descent. And I actually liked both. But what I find interesting is that he didn't really go on to have a stellar career as a horror director or really as any kind of director. I mean, he got to do a big budget movie after this, but people didn't really like it as much, and I think it was a flop. And then I think he did a second one, and then he kind of disappeared into TV, and he directed a lot of episodes of TV. And I think he's returned now to doing 2 or 3 features, none of which get very good ratings. I don't think they did that well. So really, he started off with a couple of strong movies that people liked, and then I don't know. He hasn't even been on my radar really since then.
Yeah, to be honest, this felt like a TV movie.
Mm,
Um, it really felt like this was not shot on set. I mean, this was not shot on location. It really felt like a set, and some of the shots were like really bad. I just kept thinking to myself, you know what? It's 2005. It's a low budget movie, so it's cool. But I mean, it looked really fake at times. It did not feel like they were in a real cave. Um, the makeup was too good on the ladies. They felt too comfortable. Because in actual caves, there are like insects and some animals that solely live in caves. That's their entire life cycle. They don't, their ecosystem is entirely in a cave. They don't live outside of it. And they're kind of like these freaky looking weird animals and insects. And I didn't feel any of that. They just felt like they were just like on a picnic or something. Like they were leaning up against the wall, eating their snacks. And it's just like, there'd be like things like flying at you and crawling on you and crawling next to you, and it just felt too comfortable, too pristine. And they had the full hair and makeup done. It's like if these women were really doing this, there's no reason for that they would have that type of vanity. They didn't seem like the type of characters that would be doing what they're doing. You'd think of women who would be more athletic, you know more into. They just felt like they were just going on like a regular vacation, and Juno was the one pushing for this. They didn't feel like these women who were into like these cave diving and these things that would take actual skill and like time to learn, and the physical toll that this stuff would take as well, the upper body strength and things like that. It just didn't really buy them in the role. They felt like actors playing these people. They didn't feel like the actual people themselves. So there was, from that standpoint, it felt a little TV movie to me. Like the standards like you would expect for today is like, just like you have these Marvel movies, these actors would spend months physically trying to look like the characters they're playing. And you'd have a little bit more. Again, you can't knock the budget because it wasn't intended to be some big hit. It was a sleeper hit. It was a low budget movie, but even if you didn't have the budget, you would try to make it look a little bit more realistic. I mean, it doesn't take money to make the set look a little dirtier or have some insects running around or something like that to make it feel like an actual cave and more dirty of a feel to it, you know?
Yeah. One thing I think that works really well is the jump scares. I think that he does some really effective jump scares in here, which isn't always the case. A lot of movies try for jump scares and they just fall flat, but there are several in here that I think really kind of work.
Yeah, I do think the fact that he waited to do a lot of the scare stuff, I think that helped. So like the whole setup, even though I wasn't a big fan of certain aspects of it, I like the fact that he didn't try to force a lot of jump scares early in the movie. Because that's what a lot of these horror films do, is they try to do a lot of the fake out stuff where it's just like, oh, we know that person's not the killer, but there's a horror movie, so we're going to keep you engaged by like doing a bunch of jump scares and stuff like that. So I did appreciate the fact that he did wait till for the setup to fully develop before you started getting into more of the horror elements.
Yeah, and in some ways you could almost call it a slow burn in the sense that we don't get to the actual horror, or the monsters that we're going to eventually see. We don't get to that until almost an hour into the movie, and so they really take their time getting there. But I would hesitate to call it a slow burn because I think it still is effectively suspenseful and kind of scary at times, even without the monsters. And I think it's interesting because this is something I used to ask myself, going way back. Whenever I'd watch a horror film, I would say, okay, if you took the horror elements out of this, if you took the monster out of this, would it still be an interesting story? And, a lot of movies, you can't really do it, like the Friday the 13th movies. If you take Jason out, you're not really going to have much of a movie there. There's not much in the way of character development or storytelling. But this movie, I think you can take the monsters out and you would still have a movie because it's still about a group of people stuck in a situation that's very tense, and it's kind of a survival movie. We need to get out of here. We need to find a way through this cave. And there's a lot of very suspenseful scenes that have nothing to do with the monsters. So I think it does potentially work if you even get rid of the monsters.
I agree. I felt some of the scariest parts to me were in between the setup and before the monsters came. Those scenes or those sequences in that time frame were the better scenes. Like when I think it was Sarah was caught in the little tunnel they were going through, and it started collapsing on her. Now, it did look like one of the rocks collapsing on her was clearly styrofoam because it like kind of pushed back with her shoulder. But that whole claustrophobic feel, that's real fear to me. That's why I would never go in a place like this. Or the one girl that cut her hand, I think it was Rebecca, she cut her hand. Or when Holly fell and broke her leg. Now their reactions, like Holly's reactions breaking her leg, like she kind of like got a scratch, was kind of ridiculous. Like I'd be freaking out in pain if I saw my bone protruding out my pants. So I didn't think their reactions were like at the level they should be. But those were the scariest parts to me because those were real. Those are reasons why I wouldn't go and do stuff like this. It was like, that's great. Like I would never do anything that these women are doing in a real world sense. And to me, that was scarier than like monsters that I know doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean that sequence where Sarah's stuck in the tunnel there. I mean, that's kind of like a nightmare come true. I mean, I can't imagine trying to squeeze through this tiny little tunnel, and it gets smaller and smaller, and then you kind of get stuck, right? You get wedged in here, and what are you going to do, right? You can't go forward, and if you're trying to go back, that's a nightmare, right? Because you can't even see behind you, you can't turn around, and if you're stuck, you can't even go back, so that is very scary. I found that sequence even before it collapsed, that is like that's the stuff of nightmares to me.
Yeah, there was this serial killer. I think his nickname was like the Iceman or something like that. And there was a bunch of documentaries on him because he did a lot of talking in prison and he was a really charismatic guy. And he talked about killing people so casually. And one of the first people he killed was he was hired to do it. he put him in like this in kind of like this tunnel type area, like a drain or something. But the guy was so tightly in, like his arms were pinned, and he was just kind of stuck there. And then he came back like the next day or something, and like said rats are eating through his skull trying to like get out to the other side. And when
Wow.
Sarah was stuck, I was thinking about things like that and how
Mhm.
effective like insects or rats or just like any kind of animals in there would have heightened that even more. But even without that,
Mhm.
that kind of claustrophobia and stuff like that, to me, that was like super scary. And I think, you know, if this movie would have leaned into that even more and been a little bit more like Deliverance, kind of what
Mhm.
it did borrow off of the setup of Deliverance, if it would have gone in that direction even more, I think it would have been even better. As it is, it's very good, but
Mhm.
to me, those were the elements that worked the best for me in this movie.
Yeah, I agree, and you know that's the thing about this kind of you know spelunking or whatever. You know, the climbing down into caves. I mean, it's inherently scary. You know, like you don't have to do anything. You don't have to have monsters. It's a scary thing to do. You know, to me, to go down into this dark cavern and not know are you going to be able to find a way out. You know, it's just it's a perfect location in a way for a horror film.
Are
Well,
you using a microphone or just using your computer mic?
I'm just using the iPad microphone.
Uh,
Uh,
like a
I'm not
real
even.
mic would eventually help, like something like this would help the sound.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah. And these aren't even that expensive.
yeah. I sometimes wonder if I should be looking into that.
I mean, you're a podcaster. I mean, we've been doing this for a while. A little investment would help.
Yes, yeah, you could be right. Um, okay, well, hopefully this will be all right for today. Okay, so The Descent. We start the movie with some whitewater rafting. We see three women on a raft, and there is a man who turns out to be the husband of one of the women named Sarah, and also her daughter Jessica uh, uh, are both there watching. And so after the rafting, uh, Sarah and her husband and daughter are actually in a car accident, and her husband and daughter are both killed. And at the hospital, we see the one friend, Juno, is kind of keeping her distance while the other friend is comforting her. And we see Juno actually turn and leave. And we kind of fade out, and that's kind of the opening of the movie. And 1 year later, we are in the Appalachian Mountains in the USA, and six women gather at a cabin in the country. Uh, Sarah, who is our main character, and she's dealing with the grief still 1 year later of her husband and her child dying. And Beth, who seems to be her closest friend, who was one of the three women at the beginning of the movie, whitewater rafting. She seems to be the most supportive. They drive together to the cabin where everyone else is meeting. And Juno, I kind of get the impression Juno's kind of like the queen bee of this group. She seems to kind of be the unofficial boss, and she seems to be less of a good friend, perhaps. We're kind of getting that sense. And Beth even says she's a piece of work, you know, and talks about the fact that she didn't really stick around after the accident last year. Um, so, yeah, there's definitely seems to be something there. Now, two of these women, Sam and Rebecca, weren't there last year. We didn't see them whitewater rafting, but they seem to be part of the group. They seem to be regulars. Sam apparently sent a letter to Sarah, which she was grateful for. About offering her condolences, and she apologized for not being there. She had midterm exams, and she's actually becoming a doctor. The sixth woman is new to the group, and her name is Holly. And I would describe her as a bit of a wild card or a troublemaker. And she's described as the protege of Juno. which maybe gives us a hint that she's being trained to be perhaps a queen bee, or somebody who's not necessarily a good friend. So they're apparently going spelunking, which, for those who don't know, is kind of the opposite of mountain climbing. Instead of going up, you go down, you go underground into caves. And in this case, they're going to a place that's supposed to be an easy cave to explore. They call it a level 2. And Holly, the protege of Juno, seems to think it will be boring. She talks about this book and how, they describe it. It's like a tourist place. It's not going to be very exciting. So they after a night of hanging out in the cabin, early in the morning, they drive their cars, and then they get out and they hike to the cave. But interestingly enough, Juno leaves the book about the cave in the car very pointedly. And when they arrive at the cave, it's a creepy hole in the ground. And one of them says something like, "You've got to be kidding," and it just looks like this very creepy hole, and it does not look like anything I would want to be climbing into. It certainly doesn't look like a tourist place to me. But once they go in, it turns out it's a much cooler cave than they thought. It's quite beautiful. It's amazing. There is some awkwardness between Juno and Sarah. And Juno actually apologizes for not sticking around after the accident the year before. And she says, "I'm here for you now." And, this is where we kind of see them starting to explore. And, it's actually quite suspenseful, and it's quite claustrophobic. And, they crawl through this little tunnel, and it sort of gets smaller and smaller. And someone comments that this is not how they pictured this from reading the book. And someone else says, "Oh, well, books don't always give you the right impression." And Sarah winds up getting stuck in this tunnel. And there's actually a bit of a collapse. And so the tunnel kind of closes behind them. So they now can't go back that way. And it's all very tense, and it's very suspenseful. And they talk about the book again, and somebody says, "Well, don't worry."
All right, time out. What are we doing? I thought we were going to comment on the movie. You're going through almost the entire movie. I'm going to forget what I think about the first few scenes, but you're going through the whole movie. Are we supposed to talk about one part, then comment, another part, then comment? You've gone through so much of the movie, I can't even remember what happened at the beginning, and you haven't even stopped yet.
True. I was trying a different approach here. We're still in the first. We're still in the first third of the movie.
I have thoughts on other things that have happened. I'm going to forget about everything else that have happened by the time you finish talking.
Fair enough. So
you've gone way too much in the other direction.
All right.
Is this guy going to summarize the entire movie and then say thoughts? The end. Thoughts? Then the credits roll. After the credits roll, the screen goes black. Your thoughts?
Yes. Well, we were getting very close to where I was going to stop, but
really, okay. Yes. I'll let you finish then.
Okay. So, the tunnel has collapsed. They can't go back that way, but somebody says, "Don't worry, the book says that there's 3 ways in and out of this cave. So we're okay, right?" And then, "Where's the book? We should consult the book." And Juno says, "Well, I didn't bring the book because it won't do any good." And basically the truth comes out. They are not in the Borum caves that they were actually supposed to be in. Juno has taken them to a different cave. And it's a cave that nobody has explored before. It's a brand new cave. And unfortunately, as somebody points out, that when you do this kind of thing, you always leave information so that people know where to find you. So you say, "Oh, we're going to the Borum Caves," etc., etc. So when they don't come home, people are going to look for them at the Borum Caves. They're not going to look for them here because nobody knows they're here. And in fact, nobody knows where this is. It's an unknown cave. So basically, this is a bad situation. They're potentially trapped in a cave. Nobody knows where they are. Now, do you have any thoughts on this?
My God, you've gone through so much of the movie. God, I can't even remember what happened at the beginning now. It's been so long. Okay. So there is some subtlety in the movie, and
Yes.
it is implied that Juno's having a relationship with Sarah's husband. This is my second time watching the movie, but even I was surprised when watching this how quickly the husband gets killed. It's like there's just like he barely has any dialogue. I felt a little bit more setup considering the whole basis of everything we're watching is this relationship, that there would have been a little bit more there. A little bit more scenes with the husbands, a little bit more scenes with Juno interacting with the husband or Sarah interacting with her husband. It was so short. It was kind of surprising the second time around. The first time going into it, you don't know what to expect, so there aren't any expectations. But knowing that like this is the basis of their relationship, it was kind of disappointing this time around seeing how short their interactions were. And then from there we get to the hospital stuff, and there you get kind of the sense that you can't trust everything that Sarah's seeing, because it was either intended to be shot stylized or show that Sarah's mind is a little bit warped in how she starts running out that hospital room, in that the corridors are empty, it's endless running, no one's there, it gets darker behind her as she runs. So it kind of establishes a little bit of what that twist ending is going to eventually give us with her perspective. And again, you're right, there are a lot of women that come into the movie eventually, and they try to do little things to like make you remember who these characters are. Like Sam is a doctor, and Beth is the reliable friend. I think Beth is the reliable friend. And
Yes.
You have Rebecca, and then Holly's the new person to the group. It is a lot of them. There is some camaraderie there where they're all drinking and stuff like that. And they try to establish that like, hey, Juno's like the athletic one, the leader, the pack leader, stuff like that. But I still felt a little short-handed with like how the characters were developed. I'd like to let you cut in, but I just want to try to remember all my notes because you covered so much more than I thought you were going to cover. Yeah, so you already have them in the cave. All right, so yeah, they get there. I was going to make a joke about you said it's a scary hole. I was like, yeah, there's a lot of bushes around that hole. It could have used a little bit of trimming.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So that's kind of the analogy there, and that like a lot of the people who saw this movie that try to read more into it felt it was a movie about sex and sexuality and things like that. And you have this dark, scary hole, and these women almost like sperm going into it, fertilizing it. And then out at the end comes one of them where it's like, it's kind of like birth as well. Mm-hmm. So, that whole dynamic. And then, geez, I forgot where you left off, but I'll let you cut in because I'm a little bit flustered. Go ahead.
Yes. All right. Well, just to go back a bit, at the very beginning, there's a lot of subtlety. And I didn't even notice it watching it a second time. I actually went back and looked at it a third time, and there are glances between the husband and Juno, and Juno falls in the water, somebody pushes her in the water, and the husband is the one who helps her out of the water. And it even looks like Sarah might be noticing these things. She's kind of looking over and seeing her husband helping Juno, and so there's a lot of interesting stuff there that's very subtle. And it doesn't mean much to us at that point. But over the course of the film, we kind of get more and more information about it. But you're right, it's very fast. And it's a 5-minute sequence, really, the opening of this film. And that's one of the jump scares, is the car accident when it happens, and it's so brutal what happens that it's quite shocking, and you don't quite see it coming. So it's very real. It's not like a cheap sort of cat jumping out of a closet. It's a very real moment that affects the movie, but it is an effective jump scare at the same time. So that's interesting, I think.
Mhm.
But getting back to where we were, yes, they go into this cave and they wind up exploring, and they go through the passage that gets smaller and smaller, and then there's the collapse, and they're now trapped. And they find that Juno has been lying to them and has taken them to this brand new cave that nobody knows about. And so, in fact, they don't know if there's another way out. This may be the only way in and out, and it's now collapsed behind them. So there's a lot of tension there. And even the protege, Holly, is upset at Juno for this. So very interesting. Did you have any thoughts about that moment in particular?
Well, I thought when the cave started collapsing, the movie started getting good. Because prior to that, I really wasn't that into it. I remember liking it my first viewing, but as I've mentioned before on this podcast, for me, the ending of a movie is really what makes me know if I like it or not. A movie like The Brown Bunny, if it had a bad ending, I would have thought it was as bad as all the critics who kind of panned the movie did. But I thought the ending kind of gave everything meaning. And with this movie, the ending was kind of the last impression I got. And the ending is kind of why I like this movie. And then on my second viewing, I was like, maybe the ending kind of clouded my judgment, and this movie isn't very good at all. Um, the setup with all the women, they weren't really developed that well. I didn't really care about any of them, honestly. The only thing I kind of cared about was that whole interesting dynamic with Juno and Sarah. But again, even with that, it wasn't really developed that well either. And that was the only interesting part. Um, and also when they got into the cave, it looked really fake. It's clearly green screen. So there was a lot of the first act that I didn't like. So for me, that cave collapse kind of started off kind of like the more interesting parts of the movie. And that's kind of where the movie starts getting good because it's more real world thrills and scares um, before you get to kind of like the supernatural over the top part of the stuff.
Yeah, I agree that, and not just the collapse, but the moments before the collapse where she's stuck in that passageway. And to me, that's very much a nightmare, getting stuck somewhere and not being able to go forward and not being able to go back. And to me, that's very scary, and it's very suspenseful, and it is a very real thing that could happen to somebody. So yeah, I mean, that's horror of a different kind. It's very realistic horror, and so that really worked for me. And then the collapse is kind of like, well, I guess it's part two of the horror, because okay, there's a collapse, and then part three is, oh, by the way, we're not in the caves that you think we're in, and there may not be another way out of here. So we've kind of got a three-step moment here where it's like, uh-oh, our characters are now in trouble. So there's a bit of discussion there, and Juno tries to explain that she wanted them to discover this new cave. She wanted this to be a big deal for them, and Beth says, "Come on, this was supposed to be good for Sarah. Do you have any idea what she's been through? Like, this is horrible." And she says, you don't have any idea because you couldn't get away fast enough. And sort of accusing her of being a bad friend again. And Juno says, "We all lost something in that crash." So, kind of a bit cryptic, but clearly there's something there, something unspoken. Um, and then she kind of tells everybody that, we have to keep going. We just have to keep going and hope to find a way out, because if we stay here, we'll die. So they push on. And the next major problem that they come to is, I'm not sure if this is the right way to describe it, but it's kind of like a giant canyon with the tunnel they're in. And suddenly, there's a huge cliff. There's a huge drop off, and they have to get across this chasm or this canyon to the other side. And so this is much like the other sequence where they're getting trapped in the small passage. This is now a different kind of thing, where it's a huge open cavern, but they've got to get across it, and it's very difficult to do. And we watch them in an extended sequence as they try to work their way across. And of course, they don't have enough ropes to do the job because they lost half of their ropes in the collapse of the tunnel. So as one of the characters climbs across, she has to reuse some of the equipment. Or no, I guess it's after they're done, they have to kind of pick up the equipment as they go. So they can't just leave it there. They're going to need it. So they use it, and then they have to sort of take it out and bring it with them. So it makes it even more complicated. Anyway, it's, again, to me, this is another suspenseful sequence, which is, again, a very real kind of situation. It's not supernatural. It's just, this is a very physically difficult thing to do. It's very dangerous, and we're watching them do it. Did you have any thoughts on this moment?
Yeah, that line you're talking about when she said we all lost something in that crash, it felt kind of out of place for the movie because up until now, the movie was dealing with a lot of subtleties with that whole relationship. And that kind of stood out so much. It's like, wait a minute, where's that line coming from? It's obviously going to set off triggers, and it kind of like throws all that subtlety out the window with their relationship because she lost her husband and her daughter. How did we all lose something, you know? So I felt that line was just, it was kind of like, it didn't really fit. It didn't make any sense for her to say that in the context of what was going on. And also, even in the context of the movie as a whole, it didn't really fit the tone of what they were trying to accomplish leading up to that point with the subtlety of the relationships.
Yeah,
As
it
far as
seems
like, no, go ahead.
it seems odd for her to say it because in a way she's kind of outing herself as, maybe having some secret here, because how else can you explain it? We all lost something, but what do you mean? Like, our friend is now traumatized, so we've lost our friend in a sense to this trauma. There's no way to, like, I mean, she's obviously hinting at the deeper truth, which we're going to get to, but in a way it's like, is she trying to get caught? Is she trying to bring this out into the open? Or why would you ever say that?
Yeah, it didn't make any sense. The other thing I kind of noticed is as this starts feeling more like a survival horror film, where all these things are going wrong in the cave and the women have to adjust, it kind of felt like I'm watching actors instead of like these actual like real characters that's going to be lost in the film, because the personalities, the look of the girls, the feel of like watching them, it didn't really line up with what they were doing. Like I didn't like when I picture like women that are going to go out and do something this dangerous, this death defying, these aren't the girls that I picture doing it. It's like the things that they're doing and they're trying to accomplish and they seem like they're supposed to be capable of, it doesn't line up with anything we've seen them do up until that point. We just seen them get drunk and complain and they didn't want to get up early. The type of people that do stuff like this, they get up at the crack of dawn, they're doing calisthenics, they're like planning things out, they're like getting their compasses and all their stuff together. It almost made me think of a movie named Commando. No, not Commando, Predator. I got my Arnold Schwarzenegger's movies mixed up. Where it's like Predator, it started off as one movie, then turned into a horror movie right after. And this kind of reminded me that in a way, in the sense that it starts off as one thing and it's just kind of this survival movie, then suddenly it's this horror movie. And with Predator, they're going off in the jungle here, they're going off in a cave. But either way, you have these group of people who are trying to accomplish this thing, and then suddenly, like, it turns into something that they weren't expecting. But with Predator, there was a reason for why they could do what they're doing. And the personalities, the look of the characters made you feel that they could accomplish what they were doing. With this, that doesn't really line up properly. And I think it stands out even more the further the movie goes along. It's like, why can they do this? How can they do this? Why are they suddenly capable of doing all these things? Like from them getting injured and barely reacting, like the one girl, Rebecca, gets her hand sliced open and barely, she acts like it's a paper cut. She doesn't even scream. She's like, owie. You look at her hand, it's like torn in half, you know? And then you have Holly, her bones are like sticking out of her pants because her leg is broken so bad. And she's like, ooh, ooh, like, you know, like that Peter Griffin meme when he's like holding his knee. It's like, you figure they'd freak out more, you know? It just doesn't, certain things just don't line up properly with like these girls who just feel like 9 to 5, you know, regular girls that are like going through all this stuff and their reactions, and it just doesn't line up properly to me.
Yeah. And that happens in this sequence, actually, that the hand gets cut. And that may be an important thing to note. And the other really important thing that happens in this sequence is as the character is climbing across, she discovers a piece of climbing equipment already fastened to the ceiling of this cavern. So somebody else has been here before. And they discuss this after the fact, that they are not the first people to be here. And Juno points out that this equipment is like 100 years old, you know, and if somebody actually made it out of here, we would know about this cave. So this could be a bad sign that people were in here before and nobody's ever heard of this cave. So kind of even making the situation seem more dire. And
And
shortly
again,
after
like,
this,
how just at looking at it would she know it's over 100 years old? Do like normal, like, you know, people like know stuff like that? Oh, this looks like it's 100 years old. You know, it's like,
well, I think there's two ways to take it. One is that she's, you know, basically, you know, exaggerating for effect, you know, like this is a really old piece of equipment that you would never find today if you went to the store. I mean, I'm assuming that they buy equipment, they've got equipment for this job. So it's like, oh, this is some old piece of equipment that, you know, wouldn't be sold today. But yeah, I mean, maybe it is really, really ancient and maybe she does know. I don't know. But they also do find some cave paintings, which again suggests that people have been in here before. And the interesting thing about the cave painting is that it shows the mountain and it shows two entrances, one on either side. So this gives them hope that there may, in fact, be another way out here. So um, they continue on, and Holly rushes ahead because she thinks she sees daylight, and she falls into a hole, which is what you've been talking about. She breaks her leg, and it's quite bad. The bone is sticking out. And thankfully, we have somebody who's almost a doctor in the group. And so she's attending to the wound, and people are helping. And while this is going on, Sarah hears something and she kind of wanders off, and she spots what appears to be a creature in the distance. And we're about 52 minutes into the film now, so we're pretty deep into the movie, and this is really the first time that there's, you know, a sense of, oh, I think there's something else in here with us. And she tries to tell the other people, but nobody believes her. Any thoughts about that?
yeah, I do. There's a lot I like about this movie. I mean, obviously there are a lot of things that I don't like, but one of the things I do like is that they wait for the creatures to be revealed. I like how late in the movie it happens. Honestly, I would prefer to just stay a survival movie, and it's just them trying to get out the cave. To me, that would have been more interesting. But I do like the fact that they held off as long as possible before getting the supernatural element of the movie involved.
Yeah, I agree. I think it works really well, and I do agree that they could have left it just as a survival movie, and it would have worked. It would have still been scary, suspenseful, but I do think bringing the creatures in does kick it up a notch, and it turns it into a full blown horror film. So I'm okay with that. Um, but they come to a chamber which is full of bones. And again, not a good sign. Like just clearly a lot of things are getting killed and eaten in here, and they don't know where to go. They don't know how to get out. There's several tunnels, and they can't figure out which one is the right one to take. And before they can do anything, one of these creatures attacks them. And we're now like 56 minutes in. And this is where chaos really erupts. And there's a whole lot of things going on. And one of the things that happens is Holly is killed. And Sarah falls into a hole and is knocked unconscious. Juno fights, and she manages to kill one of the creatures. But then she accidentally kills Beth, or at least chops her in the neck with her pickaxe. And as Beth collapses, she grabs onto Juno's pendant, which was hanging from her neck, and she kind of holds onto it. And she needs help, but Juno kind of backs away and kind of leaves her, does not give her help. Rebecca and Sam are lost. They don't know where the others are. They don't know where to go. They don't know how they're going to get out of here. And we kind of fade to black. And it seems like all of our characters are in a bad way at this point. Any thoughts about this?
Yeah, so the movie obviously does amp up a lot now that you have the monsters involved, and it becomes a true horror movie. Junior shows that she's a badass, but in terms of, I guess it was Beth that she killed or thought she killed.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, that's on Beth. I mean, you see, like she's fighting these monsters, all this crazy stuff going on. And you're just gonna quietly tap her on the back. It's like, come on, you know?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. You should probably be careful. Yes, that is a very good point. And it is a bit of a thing that you see in horror films where someone will accidentally stab one of their friends thinking that it's the killer. So it's almost kind of a cliche, but I think it works fairly well here. And anyway, after the blackout, Sarah wakes up and she winds up using the camera that Holly had brought with her, and she can kind of see with the night vision on the camera, and she watches creatures eating Holly. And the creatures appear to be blind, and it appears that they use sound to locate their prey. So we're starting to kind of figure out what's going on here. Juno finds Sam and Rebecca and says she may know how to get out, but she refuses to leave without Sarah. So this is, finally some good friend instincts are kicking in here. She's, instead of just leaving Beth to die, she thinks, no, I can't leave without Sarah. I've gotta find her. And then Sarah finds Beth still alive. And Beth kind of tells her that Juno did this to me and she left me here. And by the way, this pendant here was given to her by your husband, Paul. She was having an affair with your dead husband. And then Beth asks Sarah to put her out of her misery, which Sarah does. And I have to say, that's something that I find very disturbing, that idea. Like, if my friend said to me, okay, kill me now, I don't know if I could do that. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so obviously I mentioned the negative about having six main characters, all women, half of them are blondes. They're not really well developed. There's a lot of negativity with that. But there's also some positivity. So this is kind of some of the positivity. And I feel like all of these women have epic death scenes. They all have these really either interesting or cool looking or kind of like, thought-provoking kind of like ways they go out. And yeah, I mean, Beth, that's something you think about. Is like, would I want to be put out of my misery, or vice versa? Would I be willing to put a friend out of their misery like that? So as much as Beth was underdeveloped as a character, half baked, and she wasn't that interesting, her death scene was interesting, and it was a good scene. It was a good scene. The only thing I thought was hilarious to me, this is the only time I kind of laughed out loud with the movie, is you have Beth there dying, like blood guzzling out of her neck, and then you have Sarah's like, "Oh my God, you're dying! Oh my God!" And then she hands her the pendant, and like she totally completely ignores her dead friend, and she's like fixated on this pendant, while her friend is like, like blood gushing out of her neck, and she's just like wiping the blood off the pendant, and like is so focused on it. It's just like it was just kind of hilarious because they showed you this wide shot. Her complete focus is on like, oh my God, she slept with my husband. I'm dying. It's kind of like it's just like a hilarious visual to me. So that was the one time in this movie I laughed, and I guess it was unintentionally.
Yeah. Um, so, in pretty short order after this, both Rebecca and Sam get killed, and Juno is on her own again, and Juno and Sarah finally reunite. And Sarah asks about Beth, and Juno says, "Oh yeah, she saw her die." And Sarah doesn't really call her on the bluff here, because she knows the truth. So before anything else can happen, a bunch of creatures come in, and Juno and Sarah fight, and they massacre all these creatures. And then Sarah kind of shows Juno that she knows what happened to Beth. She knows the truth. She knows about her husband. She knows about the affair. And it kind of feels like a classic showdown now between these two characters. And Sarah winds up chopping Juno in the leg and kind of leaving her on the ground, surrounded by these creatures. Do you have anything to say about this before I?
Yeah, so I kind of compared it to Predator before. I'll compare it one more time in that there was a reason those guys can kill as well as they could. They were trained killers. There's no reason like they should be able to kill all these creatures. Like why are either these women so strong or these creatures so weak? These creatures can kill wild animals and physically drag them into this cave, and they're such good killers. Why can't they kill women? Why is it? Why do people say men should not hit women? Because women are as big, as strong. They don't have as much testosterone. So, but they can kill these creatures who have like these well-developed muscles that they can crawl on walls, and it just doesn't make sense why they were so easy to kill. But if you take that element out of it and you just, you go into the fantasy of the movie, there's a pretty cool scene when they go back to back and they start killing these creatures. I mean, it was like here you have survival of the fittest. The two badass women survive. They were separated. They meet back up. You have Sarah who's drenched in blood, like Carrie, and then you have Juno who's like Laura Croft, and here they are like taking these creatures out like action heroes. So if you take the disbelief part of it out of it and just look at it for a pure entertainment standpoint, I thought it was pretty cool, and that you have these two characters and that there's something there that eventually they're going to turn on each other. So the tension was good, the action was good, and things were really ramping up.
Yeah, I agree. Very visually exciting to watch. Very, very well done. But yeah, it's interesting. Often a movie would maybe claim that the characters used to be, maybe they were war veterans or something, so they've had a lot of experience. But there's nothing like that here. There's no explanation. So, yeah, you just have to sort of forget that and enjoy the action because it is very well done. So Sarah finally sees light, and she crawls up out of the cave and onto the surface. She runs to the truck, one of the trucks, and drives off. And then she stops at the side of the road. She cries and she pukes. A truck goes by, blaring its horn, which is another kind of a jump scare. And then Juno appears in the car beside Sarah. And then Sarah wakes up, and she's back in the cave. And she has a vision of her child in the cave with her. And I think in a way she's kind of happy to be with her child there. And that's kind of how the movie ends. Um, any thoughts?
Yeah, so you did kind of gloss over one of the better parts of the movie in
Okay.
that Juno and Sarah are staring at each other. And it's kind of like that old joke or that old thing where it's like, all right, we're stuck in the woods and a bear is chasing us. We can't outrun the bear. And it's like, I don't have to outrun the bear. I have to outrun you. And that's kind of what happens. It's like they're stuck there. These creatures are after them. They can't outrun all the creatures. But Sarah decides, I don't have to outrun all the creatures. I just have to outrun Juno. And that's when she cuts her in the leg and basically leaves her bleeding out for the creatures to attack her while she can try to make her escape. And again, you have the visual of her bursting out of the cave. And if you get into the metaphors, it's kind of like birth, and the whole cave being a giant vagina, with the blood and the violence and the pain, and the birth comes out of it. So that whole analogy goes out there. And then you also have the double ending. So apparently the
Yes.
US ending ends with her in the car where it's plausible that she survived. And maybe she's just seeing visions of her friend Juno. Or it could be that maybe she died in the crash. And this is just some kind of like weird nightmare before she dies. Or she died with her family, or maybe her family lived and she was the only one that died. Yeah, I feel there's a lot of possibilities you can go with the American version. I think overall they wanted less of a downer ending. I think that's why they had her survive, and then from that survival, you can demise whatever you want, surmise whatever you want from there if you want to read more into it. But the UK version and the version the director kind of wants to represent the film is a version where she's just trapped in the cave and she never escaped. Um, it's kind of a dark ending. I think the original title of the movie was The Dark, but I think it works. I don't think it's realistic that they wish she would have escaped. I think there's a lot in the cave that wasn't realistic, but her escaping would be another one of them. But overall, I thought the ending worked, and I thought the movie overall worked. Despite it being uneven, I'm judging it more so based on the type of movies we watch, which are great movies. But if you just judge this based on what it is, which is a low budget, it might have been an independent movie, um, it did really well considering where expectations were and what the end result was. It's an extremely successful movie. It's just that my expectations were a little bit higher because I knew I liked it going into it. And again, the type of movies we watch on this podcast are really high. So if I talk negative about it, is because the standards are set pretty high. But based on what they were trying to achieve and what they had to work with, they did an amazing job.
Yeah, I like it quite a lot, actually. And yeah, I think it's a very effective film. I think it's very entertaining. And in terms of the ending, I know the director has commented that either way, it's kind of a negative ending. It's kind of a dark ending because even if she got out, she's still got, all the trauma of her dead husband, her dead child, and now all of her friends are dead. So is this really better for her to live on outside the cave as opposed to being stuck in the cave and kind of dying there, but kind of believing that her daughter's with her, having this hallucination that she's finally reunited with her daughter. Um, yeah, I mean, from my understanding, I've never seen the sequel, but I believe they actually pick up from where this one ends, and both Juno and Sarah are still alive, and they wind
I
up
saw
going
the
back.
sequel a long time ago because obviously
Yeah,
it's an old movie. I remember Juno, I think, was the main character. I don't remember anything about Sarah though.
yeah. Well, I think that they're both still alive, and so they pick up from that American ending, and yeah, I don't know. Like it is far fetched that they would make it out, and it kind of made sense to me when she woke up in the cave and it was just a dream or a fantasy that she had made it out, and she was still stuck in the cave. But either way, I think it could work as an ending, and either way, I liked the movie. I enjoyed the movie, And yeah, I've seen it 2 or 3 times, and I think I'll watch it again at some point in the future because it's very entertaining.
We can wrap it up there. So I guess next week, The Exorcist,
Yeah,
and then The Omen.
sounds good to me.
Okay. Any thoughts on the film noir stuff?
I think just what I kind of wrote last night. I mean, I could get into several of those, whether it's all Humphrey Bogart, that would be fun,
Mhm.
or looking at, the great directors who made these movies. I guess one from each, 4 of them. That could be cool, but also, the idea of finding some really niche thing, like whether it be truck drivers or, something else, that's very specific. Um, that could be fun too.
Mhm. Yeah. I guess I'm leaning. I like them all ideas, but I guess I'm leaning towards either the director thing, or if we go away from the director thing, maybe like picking movies of inconsequential directors, just like
Yeah,
directors people wouldn't know today that made a great noir. Um, Either way, I think would work.
yeah,
But like, I mean, there are some movies where it's just like the directors, like we may know them because we watch a lot of old movies, but the average cinephile may not know these directors, so knowing about their movies might be interesting. Or we could
yeah.
just go with our theme of like we really like explore certain directors. Like
Mhm.
we haven't really highlighted. I mean, we talked about The Shining, but it'd be good to get into Kubrick again.
Yeah,
And I think our first episode of this format, we briefly talked about Orson Welles,
yes,
but it'd be nice to get into Welles again. So that
yeah,
would be interesting as
yeah,
well. I'd be more for one
yeah,
of those two routes.
yeah. Well, I think probably it would make sense to go with the big names first, like, I mean, first, like this year, like if we talk about here's some great directors who made these great noirs, and then maybe in the future we could go, now here's some obscure noirs, or directors you've never heard of. Starting with the more famous ones makes sense in a way to me.
Yeah. So if we went with four, I kind of named five directors though. So which
Yes.
directors would you want to go with? There's Kubrick, Wells, Lang. I think I said Hawks or Hughes.
uh,
Hawks and
I
Wilder.
think you I think you said John Huston.
Oh, Houston.
Yes, but Hawks would also be. Yeah, so
Jesus.
that's 6 of them then. Yeah. um wow, yeah, that's tough.
It's
Those are
tough because
all,
they're all good. I
they
mean,
are.
Kubrick is my favorite director, and he
Yeah.
did kind of make two noirs. But I
Yes.
mean, those other filmmakers were making films like way before him, you know? Like,
Yes.
they were more like making movies, and they're a lot older than him. They're
Yeah.
making movies before noirs were even a thing, like in the 30s as well. Um,
Yes,
I don't know if that's the reason to eliminate Kubrick, but it's a lot of great directors, man.
it is. Yeah. uh
They're all great.
yeah. Yes, and even within that, though, like you then have to pick one movie, right? So only one of the great noirs that, you know.
Well, if we have to do both, I say let's first figure out the directors, then we can start
That's right.
stressing about the movies
Yeah, yeah, right.
one
Um,
step at a time. So
yes,
we have to go Wells, right? There's no question.
yes,
That's
yeah,
one.
yeah,
Uh, Lang is pretty synonymous with that genre as well, no?
yeah, yeah. I would say so. Yeah, I think
That's
those would
two,
be.
that's a must.
Yeah,
How do you not put John Huston up there?
I know.
But
And
then
I
how do
think
you not put Billy Wilder?
exactly. I mean, those guys
Howard
definitely.
Hawks? Stanley
Yeah,
Kubrick?
yeah.
Jesus.
How can you not?
Billy Wilder, man, there's a lot of
Yeah,
great directors, man.
yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose we could extend Noirvember and go into
This
December with,
December.
you know, we
Yeah, but
could
then
do.
you want to get into other movies too in December, you know?
That's true.
Going off of 2 themed months, you want to get into other stuff too.
Yeah,
A lot of other great type
absolutely.
of movies out there.
Yeah. Um, man,
It's
uh,
tough.
it is. It's very tough. I mean, I don't think we could go wrong really with any of them. I
No,
don't think,
if
you
we
know,
could go wrong, it'd be easy.
exactly. So you could almost just roll the dice and go, ah, these are the four, just randomly pick
Yeah,
them in a way.
yeah.
Um, I don't know.
Maybe we go at the movies then.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's see what if we went with Billy Wilder. Let's see what movies we'd be picking from. Give me 1 second. Maybe that'll help us out a little bit now.
Yeah.
All right, Billy. I'm thinking like The Postman Always Rings Twice is Billy Wilder.
I think it is. And also Sunset Boulevard and
So we could. I mean, Sunset Boulevard is kind of noir. It's, you
yeah,
can say maybe it's not, but
double
The
and
Postman is all.
double
Well, let's see.
indemnity.
So Double Indemnity. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
one.
That's like
If we
one of
did
my
him, that
favorite.
would have to be the one.
I think so. Yeah.
That's a pretty vintage one,
Yeah.
1944.
Yeah.
How do you leave that one off?
I know. I love it.
All right, if we went with John Huston,
Maltese Falcon.
oh, how do you not have the Maltese Falcon on there?
It could be like the quintessential private eye noir.
Yeah. 1 second, my browser's a little bit slow.
Yeah.
So Double Indemnity, it's tough to leave that out. It's
Yeah.
tough to leave that out.
I agree.
All right, John Huston. Let's see what he's got a lot on here. Let's see, film noirs, John. What do you got? So I've already done a few John Huston movies on from previous reviews.
Oh,
So
yes.
I've already done the Maltese Falcon.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, Key Largo. I don't think I've done Key Largo, and I definitely
yeah.
haven't done the Asphalt Jungle. The Asphalt Jungle would probably be right up there.
Oh, yeah.
That had a young Marilyn Monroe in that one. I've only seen that one once too, so it'd be nice to rewatch that. The Asphalt Jungle. And then Billy Wilder, John Huston. Who was the other one? Howard Hawks.
Howard Hawks. Yes.
I've already done To Have and Have Not. I've already done The Big Sleep. So maybe not Hawks, because I've done his two best noirs, To Have and Have Not and The Big Sleep.
And we didn't mention him yesterday, so maybe that's a sign that we didn't think of him in that moment.
I think I did think of him, but I realized that I'd done two of his movies already.
Oh, okay.
It's two noirs. So that drops us back down to 5.
Yes.
So it's Kubrick, Wells, Lang. Let's see. Fritz Lang. It's kind of weird to see when these directors died. It's like some of these directors only died like a few years ago. It's so odd to think of that. You think of them from like such a long time ago, but like he died in 2018. It's kind of weird that Fritz Lang was around that long. Is that possible?
Yeah.
No, he died in 76. It says he's active from 20. I'm like, that doesn't seem possible. Like, how did Lang live till 2018? That doesn't make any sense. He died in 76. I guess his activity is like they reuse things and put his name on it.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, 76 makes a lot more sense because like, how the hell was Fritz Lang around till a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
That makes more sense now.
Yes.
So I don't know. Some people consider that noir. I don't.
Yeah, it's a bit early for noir.
The Big
Uh,
Heat.
yeah, that's definitely one of the great ones.
Yeah, The Big Heat would probably be one.
Yeah,
So who are we thinking? We have Lang, Kubrick, Wells, Wilder, and
Hugh Houston.
Houston.
Yeah, well, I think
As
it
far
just
as directors goes, I mean, as far as like great directors, you gotta have Wells, you gotta have Kubrick. It's between the other three, I think.
yeah, yeah,
What do you think?
yeah, I think so. Um,
It's so tough.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. Um,
We could try to squeeze out five, but that'll take us into early December.
yeah. Um, well, again, it's almost like just we just have to
Random?
randomly eliminate one of them.
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah, I know.
Honestly, just off the top of my head, if I had to think of a movie that probably didn't age as well as the others, I would lean towards the Wilder films because his films are more sentimental than the other guys. So I would think
Yeah,
his films wouldn't age as well as the other ones would. I could
yeah,
be completely wrong,
yeah,
but I think of his more being a director of his time rather
yeah.
than a timeless director.
Right.
I think the others you can watch their movies at any point in time and they're going to be great. I think
Yeah,
Wilder's films are of their time more than the other guys.
yeah. Well, I'm comfortable with saying let's leave him for another time. If we want to go with Houston and Lang,
Lang, Wells, and Kubrick.
yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Like that sounds good to me.
I could be wrong, but that's what I'm
Yeah,
leaning. I'm leaning.
yeah. Well, I mean, we're only doing one a week, so we could always change our mind by week four
Okay.
if we realize we've made an error.
So it's going to
Um,
be with Lang, we're going to go with the Big Heat.
yeah,
With Kubrick, we're going to go with The Killing.
right.
With who else are we going with?
Houston,
Houston, Asphalt Jungle,
yeah,
and
Wells,
do you want to go with what's that one he made with the long opening tracking shot?
Touch of Evil.
Touch of Evil. You want to do Touch of Evil?
I think so. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Because that's considered like the last great noir, Touch of Evil,
Yeah.
before you get into the neo noirs.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's
Is
good.
there one movie that's considered the first great noir? Would that be like The Maltese Falcon?
I think that's one of them for sure. Good question though. See if we can get any results on that. But yeah, I think the Maltese Falcon was certainly the first sort of great private detective noir, maybe.
So The Big Heat, The Killing, Touch of Evil, Asphalt Jungle. And we have a
Yes.
few weeks if we need to change our mind. We got 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So next Tuesday or Tuesday coming up is The Exorcist, The Omen,
Yeah.
and then we'll get into the noir stuff.
Yeah,
All right.
sounds good.
Sounds good, man.
Yeah. All
Hopefully,
right.
my coughing and stuff like that didn't ruin the podcast. We'll see when I edit it. Did I
Yeah,
sound really loud? I tried to muffle it as much as I could.
you sounded strangely silent. You know, it's like once you sort of covered up, it was like silent. It was
That's
uh,
good. Good.
it was uncanny. Yeah.
Good. Good.
So,
Okay, man. Sorry for all the delays this week.
oh, no problem. Sorry, we had to go to a third one there. I thought we were going to make it,
You
but
know
I,
what's
I
strange about this week is that you did like so much in that first segment. Like you covered
yes,
like a third of the movie.
yes,
Then you say one scene thoughts, one scene
yeah,
thoughts. But that first part you covered like a third of the entire movie. It didn't make
I
any
know, I know.
sense.
Yeah, well, you know, I swung the pendulum really far that way, and then I swung it all the way back. So, but I forgot to start my timer, so I couldn't tell exactly how much time we had left. I knew we were getting close, but I was hopeful we still had 5 minutes. But
No,
oh
I
well.
just found it funny that you just did like you just
Yeah,
kept going. I'm like, is he ever gonna stop? Should I say something? I'm like, I can't even remember
yeah,
like my notes, you know?
yeah,
And then suddenly you'd say one scene thoughts, then you do one scene
yeah.
thoughts. I'm like, wait a minute, what are we
Yes.
doing?
Well, you know, yeah. Well, you complained. You complained about the first half-hour chunk, so I thought, okay,
So now
I'll
you're
have more.
trolling me, huh?
That's right. Yeah. Yes. So next time we'll try to get it more
Ah,
succinct.
sounds good, man. All
Of
right,
course,
thank
it's
you,
The
man.
Exorcist, so it's a lot.
Exorcist.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I hope you're
Yeah,
feeling
The
better.
Exorcist is gonna be tricky.
It is.
It's gonna be tricky to get that all into one. It's a very deep
Yeah.
movie and it's a long movie.
I know. Yeah.
Ah,
But I guess we'll see what we can do.
all right, sounds good. All right, man. Take care.
Okay. You too.
All
All
right.
right. Bye.